Today, there will be no cute, folksy, storytelling, Garrison Keillor style introduction. No. We're getting down to business. It's one of those business days. Even as I'm sitting here telling you how much we're getting down to business, I'm reducing the amount of getting down to businessness that we're actually doing. So we're just going to need to get after it. We're in Nehemiah chapter 8, but we're in one of those parts in Nehemiah chapter 8 and one of those parts of these seasons that we do where it takes us on this rabbit trail all through other parts of the Bible, which I think is super handy because then we learn together how the Bible all fits together and how it all works together, how it's all cohesive. In Nehemiah chapter 8, we are seeing an event that is occurring on September 27th, 444 BC, and it is a great assembly of all of the people, all of the living descendants of Abraham, sometimes called the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, throughout the lengthy Old Testament story. And now here they are, all gathered together back in Jerusalem. The temple's been rebuilt after it was destroyed a century and a half earlier. The walls of the city have been rebuilt, and now it's time to finish the task of rebuilding the people. And it looks as though the way we're going to do it is we're going to call a great big assembly of everybody. We're going to refamiliarize ourselves with the covenant, the deal with God, the law of God, and then we're going to make a big, loud public proclamation in front of everybody that we are all going to honor the covenant and the commands of God moving forward. It looks like that's how it's shaping up here in Nehemiah 8. That's what we're going to find. But before we get into all of the events of September 27th, 444 BC, you and I have been going back and looking over the last few days at the other great assemblies of Old Testament passages past over the previous 1,800 years of history of the descendants of Abraham. And what we have seen so far is that before September 27th, 444 BC, here in Nehemiah 8, there was another great assembly a little less than 100 years earlier in Ezra chapter 3. That one was led by Zerubbabel and Jeshua, son of Jozadak, after the sacrificial system was resumed. Then we went back not quite another 100 years to the very end of the southern kingdom of Judah in 2 Kings 22 and 23 into the era of the reign of good King Josiah, and saw that he rediscovered the book of the law. It broke his heart. He called everybody together, and there was a great big assembly to say, this is what the book of the law says. We should be doing that. Why aren't we doing that? Guys, do you want to do that? And everyone's like, yes, we should do that. But ultimately, it proves to be too little, too late, and Nebuchadnezzar comes and destroys everything anyway. Then after that, we went back way, way further from the 600s-ish BC, which is where we're at with the King Josiah assembly, all the way back to the 1400-ish, maybe 1200-ish BC, to the events at the end of the life of Joshua in Joshua 24. And we see there that the occasion that has caused Joshua to call everybody together, all the living descendants of Abraham there, is that they've just got done conquering the promised land. They conquered Canaan. And now the land is divided up and the tribes are going to go set up shop. But Joshua's like, hey, real quick, before we do that, you remember everything God did, right? And how we got here and how he broke the laws of time and space, and how this isn't just another one of these little regional squabbles between tribes. The actual God of actual everything showed up and did miraculous stuff to make it clear that he's the real one and that he should be followed by us and we should take this seriously. And I don't know what y'all are going to do, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And everybody's like, we're totally going to do that too. And then Joshua's like, are you though? But really? And then they're like, no, we actually mean it this time. And Joshua's like, okie dokie. Well, you probably should. And everybody's like, we totally are. And Joshua's like, all right, I'm going to make a rock. I'm going to carve that. Are you guys sure? Because once I carve it on here, I'm carving it right now. Are you sure? And they're all like, we are sure. Paraphrases mine. So that's how that assembly went. So now we're going to jump back, a generation or two before that great assembly at Shechem that we read about in Joshua 24. And this next great assembly of the Old Testament of all the living descendants of Abraham, is one that is sort of spread out over the entire book of Deuteronomy. So in some ways you could say basically the whole book of Deuteronomy is another one of these. And indeed, the source language behind the term Deuteronomy, which is of course not a word you and I use outside of this context, it just doesn't come up in real life conversation. You don't just have deuteronomical things that occur, like when you go to get coffee with a friend or whatever. I mean, it's strictly comes up in a Bible context. It means the second law giving. So Deuteronomy is all about an assembly of the people where Moses is pulling them together, and he's realized that generation one of the people who came out of exile, out of slavery in Egypt, they don't get it. They're going to wander in the desert. They're probably going to die in the desert. They're not going to see the promised land. They did weird stuff. They didn't believe. They weren't faithful. They didn't keep their end of the covenant. And this new generation is coming along with scrappy, new, young, brave leaders. And it's clear that this is the generation who will go out of the desert wandering and into the promised land of Canaan. And so Moses deems it necessary, or God deems it necessary through Moses, to get everybody together from this new generation and remind them of what God has done for them in the past, same pattern that Joshua went with, and to make sure they understand the law, the covenant, the deal, and the character of God via what the law says. Because remember, the law isn't just about rules. The law is also a story. The law is also the character of God revealed through narrative and his working in history and rules and cultural expectations and stuff like that. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there's been a little bit of wandering and hiking in the first 4 chapters, but then finally Moses is pulling this whole thing together. Deuteronomy 5, it says, Moses summoned all Israel and said, "Hear, O Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb." That's a reference back to some stuff with Abraham 800-ish years before the events we're reading about here in Deuteronomy chapter 5, or 1700-ish years before the stuff we're looking at in Nehemiah. "The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our fathers that the Lord made this covenant, but with us, with all of us who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire on the mountain. At that time I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire and didn't go up on the mountain. And the Lord said," and he said, quote, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything." And he goes through and he repeats the 10 commandments over the next several verses. And then we pick it back up in Deuteronomy 5:22. Moses is talking again now after he's quoted all the commands. And he says, "These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness." And he added nothing more. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. So he's recapping all of the stuff that the old dying off generation who was with us in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, he's recounting all the stuff that they would remember, that they were there to see when they were younger. He's recounting this for the people who weren't old enough to remember that, so that they will remember and internalize this whole story as well, because clearly Moses, like Nehemiah, like Ezra, like Joshua, like Josiah, understands that knowing your place, if you're a descendant of Abraham, in this redemptive narrative, in the grand story of the relationship between God and these people, is vital to staying on track. Otherwise, you just got some arbitrary rules that you don't understand from a God whose character you don't understand, and you're going to get bored of that, and you're going to chase after other gods that are carved out of rocks and wood that look more interesting to you, that hot ladies from other surrounding tribes are really into. I mean, I listened to country music for 2 years in the 90s to impress a girl, for crying out loud. Dudes will do anything if they think a girl is pretty, and chasing after fake gods is surely one of them. This is meant to ensure against that, so that they will understand the power of the narrative and the power of the actual God on the other end, and not be suckered into chasing after this stupid stuff. Then as we charge ahead through Deuteronomy, what we find is that this assembly is real long. There's one place in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul talks for so long that a kid falls asleep and falls out of a window and dies. Don't worry. God brings him back to life and it all works out in the end, I guess. But this feels like it'd be another candidate, as I just thumbed through Deuteronomy, for somebody getting tired and falling out of a window and maybe temporarily dying. I'm still turning pages here. That's a lot. We got commands concerning food, commands concerning tithes, commands concerning false prophets. That's a good one. Commands concerning the Sabbath, your commands concerning festivals, commands concerning leaders and judges, and Levites, marriage and family life, manslaughter, not supposed to do that, and congregation, and then protection for the weak. There's some real cool justice stuff in here that I've read to you before. Looks like there's some stuff maybe about what happens if you accidentally kill somebody's ox and things like that. We can laugh at all of that, but these are very real concerns that could divide the whole community. And then finally, in chapter 27, 22 chapters of this kind of material later that everybody was listening to, they're reading all the terms of service here. Now in chapter 27, we're finally going to tick the box to be like, yes, I actually read that. And I actually assent to it. Deuteronomy 27:1. Moses and the elders of Israel commanded the people, keep all these commands that I give you today. When you've crossed the Jordan into the land your God is giving you, set up some large stones and coat them with plaster. Get that, right? This is an old man Moses knowing he is not going into the land. And also, think about what Joshua did in chapter 24 of the book of Joshua. He did that. I mean, there's more than one setting up of stones. But again, Joshua was like, we got to make a rock to commemorate this thing that we have re-upped the covenant yet again after conquering the land. Verse 3, this is still Moses talking. Write on them all the words of this law when you've crossed over to enter into the land. The Lord your God is giving you a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. And when you have crossed the Jordan, set up these stones on Mount Ebal as I commanded you today and coat them with plaster. Shechem is right between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. So Joshua really did follow through on this stuff. Moses gives them some more instructions, and then he reiterates the super basic tenets of the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, this conditional deal. He says in verse 28, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all nations on earth. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. But again, this is a conditional covenant, and in verse 15 it goes the other way. And now Moses is telling this whole giant assembly, however, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. You'll be cursed in the city and cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land and the calves of your herds and the lambs of your flock. You will be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out. And he makes it clear that this is going to be something you won't be able to miss. You'll know it's from God, but also your neighbors won't be able to miss it. They will know that you violated your relationship with the one true God, whether you obey or disobey. Either way, everybody's going to know that I'm the one true God and I am your God and you are my people. So it would be smarter and better to obey. Finally, in Deuteronomy 30, there's this little tag at the end of this giant 25 chapter plus covenant ceremony to say, here's what happens if things go wrong. Like, don't totally give up hope. You'll recall this from Nehemiah's prayer in Nehemiah 1. He's invoking this promise of God. Deuteronomy 30 verse 1. When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come upon you and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I command you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. Nehemiah is specifically referencing this passage in his prayer in Nehemiah 1. Even if you've been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your fathers, and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how all of these fit together. Then, after we've got all of this in our hip pocket and we've considered it as one big clump, all of these major covenant meetings of the Old Testament, then we're going to go back to Nehemiah and see how that one plays out and how it compares and contrasts with these big ones that we've looked at over the last few days. Good times. I love doing stuff like this. Thank you for being up for the deep dive and the rabbit trails and trying to do this thing right. I really appreciate that we get to do this thing together. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.